Welcome to the far-flung future of 2025. All right, that's enough of that. Let's go back to 1937. So where do we leave off? It was famous funnies. Like we did in our last episode, let's check in on Eastern Color's famous funnies and see what kind of comic strips they were reprinting in 1937. Again, because these were thick anthology books, I won't be talking about every feature, but a representative sample. In April of 1936, just months prior, Lank Leonard's strip Mickey Finn debuted. And I know what you might be thinking. Lank Leonard sounds more like a made-up name than Mickey Finn. And you'd be right. His real name was Frank, and his nickname and pen name was Lank. Frank had been a traveling salesman who just enjoyed drawing on the side until the day he happened to show his portfolio to a professional cartoonist and was told he had talent. Frank took one of those cartooning correspondence courses so many artists back in the day did, then night courses at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and the Art Students League of New York. Although Frank traveled everywhere for work, he called Port Chester, New York home. All the major characters of Mickey Finn were said to be based on people Frank knew in Port Chester. Michael Aloysius Finn, or Mickey, was based on a local policeman. Mickey's mother was based on Frank's mother. His real-life Uncle Phil inspired the strip's cranky co-star Uncle Phil. Kitty Kelly, Mickey's fiancée, was modeled on Florence McLaughlin, Frank's own fiancée, who he will marry in 1939. It was claimed that Lank, or Frank, based Mickey Finn on himself. It's also been claimed that Mickey was a beat cop because of the popularity of Dick Tracy. But you can't read 2 pages of Mickey Finn without suspecting that he was intended as a Joe Palooka clone all along. Like Joe Palooka, Mickey Finn is innocent and naive, yet those qualities usually put him in the right, while his comic foil Uncle Phil, just like Joe Palooka's manager, Nobby Walsh, shares what he thinks is wisdom from experience and is always wrong. Making Mickey a policeman makes the cloning less obvious, but Mickey Finn is less of a cop than Muldoon and Tootie in Car 54, Where Are You? The uniform is largely an excuse to allow him to just wander the neighborhood day in and day out and still have a job. Although Mickey Finn will never break out to other media or into merchandising, at its peak it was carried by over 300 newspapers and it lasted for 40 years, so that is a measure of success. While Mickey Finn gets 2 consecutive pages an issue, Rex Collier's War on Crime continues to be a top-tier strip with 4 consecutive pages, so let's check in on that real quick. I talked at length about War on Crime in episode 24, and I won't spend long on it now. At the start of 1937, the strip is recounting the story of John Dillinger, even his raid on a police station in Warsaw, Indiana, not far from here. Dillinger's story is over 3 issues into 1937. For the rest of the year, we learn about Babyface Nelson, who you probably recognize, Bill Mahan, I think that's right, a kidnapper who was big news at the time but forgotten now, and the Carpus Barker gang, who you probably know from Ma Barker, and the Barkers being inspiration for the Beagle Boys. I'm not going to dive into the stories because this channel is about comic books and not true crime, so let's move along. I am not a big fan of Napoleon. It's just a gag-a-day strip about an Irish wolfhound and how his antics often frustrate rather than bring joy to its owner, a man named Elby, or known as Uncle Elby. But is yet another example of a strip that is, while forgotten today, was a big deal at the time. It started in 1932 when Clifford McBride began its strip as Napoleon and Uncle Elby, the uncle part because Elby was based on his own uncle, which seems to have been a thing about back then, not because the family ever showed up often in the strip. Despite being about little more than the unshakable love between a man and his dog, Napoleon ran for 29 years and was carried both in American and foreign papers. Now, it never reached 100 papers even at its peak, but that's not what makes a strip a success, right? It's as I mentioned before, it's merchandising money, and there was some for Napoleon, although it never reached Buck Rogers level merchandising. He did become the mascot character for a dog food company in the 1940s, so there's that. He was also surely, or almost surely, the inspiration for another comic strip character that you would recognize, Marmaduke. I also had a pet theory, if you will, about um, the, about Clifford the Big Red Dog and how Napoleon's creator's name, Clifford McBride, might have been the inspiration for that name. But apparently, this sadly isn't true. Clifford's creator had always maintained that Clifford the Big Red Dog was named after his wife's imaginary friend from childhood, so it seemed like a good idea when I thought of it. With the remainder of our time, let's try to untangle Skyroads. Skyroads was an aviator adventure strip that started in 1929 and originally drawn by Buck Rogers artist Lieutenant Dick Calkins, U.S. Air Corps reservist, as the credits continued to read into the mid 1930s, well after Calkins' assistant Russell Keaton had actually taken over the strip in its entirety. It followed in the footsteps of the original Aviator strip Tailspin Tommy, but was definitely not a Tailspin Tommy clone. In fact, what made Skyroads both unique and kind of hard to follow is that it was never a strip about any one hero at all, but a strip about aviation in general. Every story arc might have a new lead character or an entirely new roster of characters. Luckily, in the world of comic strips, every aviator is a strapping tough guy with an amazing skill set who can handle any melodramatic villain who comes along. When we first check in on Skyroads at the beginning of 1937, it actually looks more like a Terry and the Pirates clone. Our strapping hero is a guy with the unfortunate nickname of Skid Bankhead, and he's got a kid sidekick named Jerry. Skid is a crack shot with a gun and can shoot a thrown knife out of the air. Instead of a plane, they're on a schooner and dealing with mutinous pirates. Skid has a partner with the more impressive nickname of Hurricane Hawk. They're business partners or friends. The 1930s was not progressive enough for them to be romantic partners. Um, Anyways, Hurricane is the brains to Skid's brawn, and he's busy trying to puzzle out a mysterious coded message. There's larger than life villains like Stefanich, who can take a bullet thanks to his bulletproof vest, and is always armed with his hook hand, and further knows Indian faker tricks like being able to stop his breathing. He's also strong enough to dig himself out of his own grave. Now, how this ties into aviation, yes, I'm sure you are wondering, is that Hurricane is an inventor and he's working on a stratoplane. In the world of 1930s comic books, there are three inventions that keep cropping up in story after story. One is a ray gun that shuts down mechanical devices, basically anticipating what an electromagnetic pulse can do to electronic devices in our real modern age. The second is a sleep gas that functions like ether but can work at ranges and effective over a broad area, usually fired from a gas gun. And the third, and probably most common of all, is a plane that can fly in the stratosphere. Bad guys are always inventing these planes or after good guys who have these planes. Whoever flies the stratosphere rules the skies. And maybe they're right because Boeing creates the first stratoplane, the 307 Stratoliner, in 1939, and Boeing has been successful ever since. Now, our heroes finish the stratoplane, sneak off the island the plane was built on, and the air pirates, they weren't really pirates, they were air pirates, who had been after them, land on the island too late and wind up taking out each other in betrayal, though Stefanich survives to be used as a recurring villain later on. Meanwhile, our heroes have a stratoplane, but no place to land it. They fly over China and Mongolia, but both countries are suspicious of this new plane and won't let them land. Instead, they find an uncharted island, one home to a mad scientist called Dr. Gory. A mysterious woman helps them escape from Dr. Gory, her secret hinted at from the very start when Jerry notices she sounds like she has a cold. By October, Skyroads' presence in the book has grown from 2 consecutive pages to 4 consecutive pages. Top tier stuff. Dr. Gory was on his way to the Dutch authorities in the East Indies, but the woman has to blow him up to save everybody. The name she gives is Dagmar Collingway, and after she reports Dr. Gory to the Dutch, she reveals she has to complete a mission for her dead brother, a U.S. Secret Service agent, to reach Ethiopia. Skid is suspicious, and this splits the group, with Hawk and Jerry taking her to Ethiopia, where it turns out Dagmar was always a man in drag, Captain Jack Lance. While this might seem like an unusually progressive twist, I suspect the author or his editor felt that this was necessary for a misogynist audience to understand how Dagmar could have been such a good fighter. Now, Jack, to his credit, is amazing at gender fluidity. Just check out this dress he was in when he identified as Dagmar. And this would be hard for a 100% biologically female woman to look good in. Anyway, Jack/Dagmar is there in Ethiopia to negotiate something with the Ethiopians, but we don't find out what because Hawk and Jerry have to get out of there as fast as they can because the Italian bombardment of Ethiopia begins. As we know from my 1936 Year in Review episode, this was very timely news, and it's interesting how Skyroads correctly identifies the Italians as the villains in the story and not the Ethiopians. Now, on the last page of Skyroads to be published in 1937, Hawk and Jerry have long since left Ethiopia, returned to the States, and have been hired by a West Coast flying circus. No, not that flying circus. Stop. A real flying circus, or at least that used to be a real thing. Anyway, there is one other thing that's different about Skyroads that I want to talk about before wrapping up today. And you might have already noticed what that is. Skyroads reads differently than a lot of the other comic strip reprints because we're not getting Sunday pages here. We're getting reprints of the dailies. Most strips don't include those in the comic books because the Sunday page is already the right size and compiling all those daily strips onto one page is extra work. But as far as I know, Skyroads never had a Sunday page, so here we are. And that's it. Famous Funnies is still tooling along, doing what they've been doing for over 3 years now, and it seems to be working for them. But what, you're not asking yourself, about Dickie Dare? Melissa, Dickie Dare is in Famous Funnies, and you've mentioned that before as one of your favorite comic strips from this period, but you never talk about it. Well, I'm going to solve that next time with a special spotlight episode that you weren't expecting on Dickie Dare. See you then. Bye-bye.